Malaysia's participation in international debates, the introduction of the Royal Malaysian Debating Championship, and the formation of the Speech and Interpersonal Communication Enhancement Unit, or known as SPICE. And now it is known as IIM World Debate and Oratory Center. He tirelessly worked for the improvement of debate standards in Malaysia and IIM. He envisioned a strong debating and critical thinking culture in IIM, Malaysia, and Muslim world. We are honored to name the Challenge Trophy in his name. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward Almarhum Prof. Dr. Muhammad Arif Zakallah for his endless dedication for the cause of debate. First and foremost, before the arguments begin, it gives me great pleasure to introduce members of both benches. On the opening government bench, we have the members of Team KYS-A. On the opening opposition bench, we have the members of Team SSP. On the closing government bench, we have the members of Team STAR. Finally, on the closing opposition bench, we have the members of Team KYSC. Next, let me introduce the judges for this grand final. First, we have Madam Nur Fahda. She is a lawyer and a managing partner and founder of the firm Fahda Nur and Yusmadi. She was the former best speaker and Asian champion at the All Asians Intervarsity Debating Championship in 1998 and 3 times national champion for English debates. Next, we have Sir Kamal Abdullah. He is the Managing Director of NV Terminal Sdn Bhd as the Development Consultant, and he has represented IRM in so many international tournaments. Next, we have Brother Banasir. He is now the head of Cloud and Data and Access Engineering and Chief Technology Officer at Sixer Technologies. He represented IRM in many international competitions, including World Championship. Next, we have Dr. Ahmad Lutfi. He is now an IT consultant. He represented IIM in many international competitions, including the finalists of Grand Final ESL 2008 and Austral's ESL Champion 2009. And last but not least, we have Brother Ikram Sharif. He is the EdgeCall for IDC 2023. He was the ESL finalist in Oxford Intervarsity Debate Competition 2022, ESL semi-finalist for Cambridge Intervarsity Debate Competition 2022, and lastly, the semi-finalist for Malaysia National Universities Debating Championship for 2021. So without further ado, we invite the Prime Minister to start the debate. The floor is yours.
Mic test. Mic test. I hope I'm audible. social movements is to achieve social change, is to achieve effective change on globally, right? And we say that on their side, by the use of anger in social movements, this simply they cannot achieve this on their side of the house. Before I move on to argumentation, a few framework on side OG. Firstly, what does social movements look like in status quo? Understand that this is in the 1950s where we're trying to fight for basic rights such as feminism, fighting for voting rights, and etc. We say that now social movements are becoming essentially more progressive in the status quo, meaning they're fighting for more things such as microaggressions, such as workplace discrimination. Secondly, what does the OG characterize the use of anger in social movements? This means opting for more radical forms of protest, such as violent protests, such as ruining public infrastructure, etc., and going to a more radical scheme of trying to push for a certain notion or push for a certain perception in status quo. Thirdly, we see that the principle that we're trying to push on OG is that not all good attention is good attention, and we say that at the end of the day, the aims of the social movements will be achieved best on side OG. Fourthly, we agree that on their side of the house, they can achieve critical mass. We agree that on their side of the house, awareness can happen more. But further in my speech and further in my argumentation, I'll explain why this critical mass isn't always the most beneficial thing in a certain social movement. And at the end of the day, critical mass isn't the most crucial, most prominent thing to get effective change in a certain social movement. Three things OG is going to prove to you today. Number one, how the use of anger or radical movements will create more harm to the social movements than good. Secondly, how less buy-in will happen into the social movement on side opposition. And thirdly, how optimal effective change is more likely to happen on our side of the house. Moving on to argumentation then, on two arguments in my speech. Number one, how it harms the narrative of the social movement, and secondly, how participation is less likely to happen in these social movements. Firstly, understand that when you get harmful attention, it's simply going to set people to think of your social movements as a certain social movement that's aggressive, a certain social movement that's trying to coerce the public into thinking a certain way. Understand that every social movement has an opposing power. This means even feminism, feminism, there's still opposing powers that exist in all social movements. Why does this correlate and why is this important? Understand, because once you opt for more radical ways of protesting, once you use things such as once you start ruining public infrastructure and using violent protest, it gives a leeway to the opposing power. It gives them the strength to actually call you out for it and create a notion in the public or a perception to the public that, hey, look at this movement. The only way that they want to push for what they fight for is by harming society, is by causing chaos in the society. Therefore, we shouldn't support this social movement in the first place. They're not going to get that effective change at the end of the day. Secondly, how this affects the second layer of analysis, how it changes societal views and perceptions of a certain social movement. Understand, a majority of social movements fight for the same principle, is that they want equality at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they want peace in the world. Understand, the moment you use anger in social movements, and once you opt for more radical ways, and once you start actually causing chaos in the public, it simply contradicts the principles of your social movement itself. And how does this correlate to the second argument on how participation is less likely to happen when people view or perceive your social movement as a social movement who doesn't stick to its principles and isn't aligned with what they're trying to push for in society? I'll take you in a second. So understand that why this perception is important at the end of the day, because that's how you're going to get people to support your movement in the first place. You want people to see your movement as a movement which is trying to push for societal change, societal benefit, and you want to garner the support in the first place, and you say that it's less effective for them to garner some sort of quality support on side opposition, right? Before I move on, I'll take a point from opening.
Okay, if it's possible to have a social movement without the use of anger, then why has every single social movement to ever exist have used anger in their movement to begin with?
Understand that we say that is not true, because understand people have already done things such as campaigning in status quo, and these things have already worked. The reason, I'm going to use your own example against you, these social movements that happen in status quo, these movements like feminist protests in the public has got for in the first place, which correlates to my next layer of analysis, how it clouds the main contention of the movement in the first place. Understand that when you use anger, you're pushing everyone's focus to a certain issue that's happening in status quo. Understand that when this happens, people lose the true meaning of what you're trying to push for. Such, for example, if you're trying to push for climate change and you opt for more radical ways of protesting, such as eco-terrorism and etc., it's more likely for people to see as the main headline of your social movement. It's more likely for people to say, oh, when I look at climate change, when I see climate change social movements, I think of eco-terrorism, I think of these people who are cutting my pipes just to push the message that we have to save the climate. And at the end of the day, it wouldn't even be in my best interest to support these social movements in the first place because of things they opt to do, right? And at the end of the day, these social movements are harming me at the ground. So why should I support these social movements in the first place as compared to our side, where we want to push for a world where these social movements, even though, like we say that on our side, we get less attention, we say that the attention we get is the most crucial to these social movements in the first place, and this is what these social movements need to get that effective change that they want to get at the end of the day. We say that the urgency for these social movements to actually opt for more radical ways of protesting isn't necessary in status quo because of my framework because of my framework and characterization that OG has proposed to you. So understand that at the end of the day, we want to push for a world where these social movements actually get to send a message across the world, and people don't see them as nothing else as what they are trying to fight for in the first place. For all those reasons, side with OG. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Next, we invite the Leader of Opposition for the debate. The floor is yours.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, realize that for the social movements that are happening in status quo to even exist in today's world, people need to get angry for that discussion to even exist in today's world. Realize that this House regret motion, meaning that we want to prove to you why we don't regret the use of anger for people to even voice out what is happening in society nowadays. So firstly, how do people even realize they are fighting against something that is something that is not granted for their right? Realize that without the use of anger, how do people even realize that they are fighting, that they are suffering from an injustice? One, for this discussion to go out for social movements in status quo to go out in the first place, to exist in the first place, people use anger to prove to society why is it that it is so urgent for their rights to be granted. Realize that in the past, because this House regrets motion, right? In the past, in society, it has become so normalized to treat women badly, to treat black people badly. It has become so normalized to oppress minorities. So when these oppressed minorities use anger to demonstrate how urgent it is for their rights to be granted, it is when discussion is finally generated. And why is this discussion so important? Why we think that anger shouldn't be regretted for this discussion to happen is going to be explained later in my speech. So first of all, anger that we want to characterize today isn't one with violence. That is the proper anger. We concede to the fact that in history, in the past, anger has caused some violence to happen. But we also want to impose on you an ethical dilemma. Without sacrificing one person to save the other 5, how will that saving even be successful in the first place? Because realize that without the use of anger, how do people even realize that they are being oppressed? See, in a society where somehow social movements are just calm, without people fighting for their rights in a calm manner, why would society that has normalized oppression to these minorities, why would they even take this social movement seriously? They just if you don't get your rights, nothing's going to happen because you're supposed to be calm because anger isn't used. So when anger is used, people see, oh, this is urgent, we need to fix this. If you don't fix this issue, these people are going to get angry and society won't function anymore. An example I want to use is the feminism movement. In the first place, if women don't get angry over how many oppression they face in society, how does other women in the society even realize the injustice they're facing? Because they realize that in the past, because again, this house regrets motion. In the past, in a society where the most majority of opinions are opinions that are for oppressing these minorities, how would even their frustration even be heard in such a saturated society without the use of anger? Because realize that there's so many inequalities happening in the world. There's so many oppression happening in the world. So without anger, how do we even redirect the focus for people to solve how urgent it is this society that's being fought for by these social movements with the use of anger? Sure, thank you.
If radical social movements or radical protests were so efficient on your side of the house, why did the feminist movement progress into fourth wave feminism?
Because realize that without realize that every social movement has been counted as radical in the first place because they are going against what's the normal in society. So everything that people that oppress minorities are fighting against, people first view it as radical. If women back then didn't use anger to demonstrate how oppressed they are in society, me and Amanda wouldn't even be standing here today because we don't even have the right to education. We will be instructed by our parents to just stay at home, wait for a guy to marry you and cook and clean for him. That's all we're gonna get. If you don't use that anger to actually redirect the focus to make sure society notice how oppressed we are in society, how will attention even be given to us? Because realize that there's so many discussions in society about inequality, but how do we state to the society that our cause is the most urgent is by use of anger. Hence why we don't regret the use of anger for the social movements. And what I want to prove to you is the importance of discussion. Because when we use anger, because as side of opening government has already stated, right, in status quo nowadays, people are using radical ways to prove how important it is for their rights to be granted. Because realize that even, as I said earlier, we have to sacrifice one to save like 100. Because without that cloud being generated by the actions of these angry people, by the use of anger, how do people even realize how important it is for their right to be granted? Because realize that if you were to do social movement in a calm and collected manner, people would simply dismiss you with like, oh, it's okay if we don't give them these rights. We can just focus on other things nowadays, because if they were to even fight about it, nothing's going to happen even if you don't grant them that right. So when we show them how angry we are, how courageous we are, in how serious we are in fighting against this oppression, people realize how urgent it is for that right to be granted in the first place. So our trade-off is, sure, maybe our movement would be seen as radical, but then all social movements are radical in the first place because we are going against what's normal in society. But we realize when people go against what's normal in society, other people in society realizes what is the problem in the first place. Other people in society would discuss about it and talk about, okay, why are these people fighting about this? Why are people getting angry about this? There will be discussion generated. And when discussion is generated, that is at the point of time in which when people would start to see, oh, we have to grant them these rights because one, they are human like us, we have to grant them these rights. And two, if we don't grant them these rights, some backlash would happen against us because the use of anger is seen as very, very important. So what I want to impose to you is without the use of anger, one, people won't even realize what is the problem in society because no discussion is refocused to the main issue at hand. So when this issue isn't discussed as society, how do people even realize the problem that is proliferating in our society? Without people realizing what the problem is, how do people even solve that problem in the first place? With that, I have never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Next, we invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the speech. The floor is yours. Before I start my speech, I would like to wish the best of luck to all members in the finals. And thank you. What opposition wants to fight for in this debate is having more discussion in the social movement. But I think they necessarily didn't even forget or didn't even mention what they're fighting for is not necessarily discussion. They're trying to fight for coercion. Now, before I move on towards my debate, a few rebuttals towards the side of opening opposition. What did leader of opposition come up here and do? First, they completely misrecognize or not even take in consideration the characterization that we've already given you from the first speech. We already told you what social movements is already like in status quo. We're more likely progressive, and there's no such thing such as like trying to fight for basic human rights. Those things exist in the past, and understand that you cannot set a debate in the past. So therefore, we don't think that opening opposition should take this debate because they don't even want to debate this debate in status quo, right? Now, moving on towards my second response towards the leader of opposition. She talks about how they're going to like try to prove the urgency in the situation by having them go angry, by having more attentions to exist in the first place. Even if we want to concede that there is like attention, well, we already conceded at the start. We said that not all attention is good attention. Even if you're about to make change, you also understand that if you're going to make change, you also come with a lot of harm and backlash towards your movement. And they conceded themselves that the only reason why society even wants to participate or society even wants to listen to your movement is meaning only because they're scared. Meaning that your social movement already detriment or harm yourself for being a movement that's not even morally consistent. You're known as a movement that coerces people into trying to follow your movement, and you're more likely or not going to reduce the buy-in because people don't want to necessarily go to a movement that is scary. People don't want to go to a movement that is unsafe, and people don't want to go to a movement that harms society as itself, right? Before I move on, sure, I'll take your point.
How do people know that you're oppressed on your side if everyone is like living in an echo chamber where this normalize what you're facing?
Alright, I think I'll answer this with one simple example. I think everyone here knows about the Black Lives Matter movement, right? That thing happened in 2022, and understand that the whole reason why the Black Lives Matter movement reached critical mass in the first place because of the current events that exist on status quo, because of the fact of the oppression towards George Floyd, right? We understand that during that situation, there is no use of anger in the first place. Social movement can still reach and reach effective change if there's also other factors. It's not necessarily just getting awareness, and their side is also getting not just awareness but also backlash to social movement. And what movement can be able to perceive? What movement can actually engineer to change if there's no people supporting the movement? Fine, opening opposition. You may get people to know your movement, but how many can you get to actually participate in your movement, to actually do something for your movement? That's something that opposition cannot get in this debate, right? Now moving on towards my arguments, right, on how it creates more friction in social movements in of itself. Understand that in a movement itself, we have like different goals, but we all want to achieve one thing. Understand that when you use anger in the social movement, what does that lead to? It leads to the social movement having more friction, because not everyone agrees to the fact that you're using anger in the first place. What's going to happen then towards the social movement? It basically virtually signalizes this movement to be a harmful one, to be a radical one. And understand that when that thing necessarily happens, once the backlash exists in the movement, the participant or the members of the movement will have friction in the movement in of itself. What do I mean by that? Meaning that the people that uses anger in a social movement, because of that, the people that don't necessarily agree with the movement in the first place will be the one at harm. The people who voices that they wanted to care for so much, in the end, will be shut down by the people who uses anger in social movement. Understand, in their side, they're not actually able to cater towards representation in the social movement itself, because the use of anger shuts down the voices to be heard in the social movement. We say that once you use anger, because of how loud the voice really is, it shuts down all other voices. So we say on their side, they're not standing for what really is the goal of a social movement, which is moral correctness and in the end, participation, right? They can't even stand for that. So we say that the use of anger necessarily harms the movement in itself. It doesn't even it harms the movement, not just how the movement looks like in society, but it also necessarily harms the movement, the members of the movement also. Before I move on, sure.
Maybe one movement that succeeded with no expression of anger or emotion, not Black Lives Matter, not feminism, but please neither did.
understand that we already told you that in this debate, we're going to debate in a society that's more progressive. I don't think that you're really being generous on your side by saying that, oh, right now we're going to take this debate in the 1950s where everyone's being oppressed. Obviously, in that situation, we don't think that it's fair for you to use the characterization. We already said to you the characterization in this debate, which is currently in status quo, which is how debate is supposed to go in the first place, because it's not fair to use the characterization. We already can see that even if we don't get that much awareness, we get more participation because we're trying to educate people, not force people to, in terms of trying to get the movement in the first place. I think Dina already gave a beautiful characterization and beautiful argumentation when telling you necessarily once you create anger, it's going to make society even more like angry with you, right? Once that thing happens, it's more likely not the opposing power, for example, the feminist movement, the patriarchy, will have you open a leeway for them to criticize you, to shame you for that, and to also create more harms towards you, create more backlash towards you in the first place. We think that social movement needs to be morally correct in order for them to necessarily get change in the first place, right? Before I move on, sure.
Can you please differentiate what is a movement with the use of anger and a movement without? Because your Prime Minister told us that not using anger looks like campaigning, but as we can see, campaigning also is the use of anger in certain events.
We think that peaceful campaigning, such as trying to educate or making posters and such, or using social media, guys, how Black Lives Matter movement even spread in the first place is through social media. Things that does not use anger, such as radical social movements, are the ones that we're trying to regret in this debate, are the things that we're not trying to fight for in this debate. Because we say once you use radical, once you use anger in debate, you also turn the people against you. You make more people hate you, and you coerce people to not even want to join your movement. Because what society wants to join a movement who they don't even agree with who they don't even agree with what they're doing, right? Understand that if they're doing something that is not understand that if they're doing something that is dangerous, that's going to reduce the buy-in. And we tell you that buy-in is one of the most important things in a movement, because if you want a society to if you want a social movement to actually achieve progression, you need to have society to actually participate in your movement. What society wants to participate in a movement that they think is dangerous? What society wants to participate in a movement that they think that if they enter towards the movement, they don't think that they're safe? You're necessarily detrimenting the safety of society, and you're not even necessarily getting them to even participate in the movement in the first place. Fine, even if you get even if on opposition side you get discussion, we tell you that the discussion is already shut down by the anger. Understand that the headline of that necessary movement won't be about what you want to achieve as a movement, but it will be what did you do in the debate, right? In that situation, right? We tell you that if you actually want a side that caters to a social movement, where we can actually get people to participate in it, where we don't get harmed, so it can detriment the movement as a whole, go for side of opening government. Thank you.
Thank you, the Deputy Prime Minister. Next, we invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. The floor is yours.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, if I stood up here and started screaming that I was angry, the first thing that Naila would do was come up to me and tell me, what's wrong with you? And that's exactly what we're fighting for on opposition side. Okay, a couple of things to prove today, right? Okay, I'm going to be proving to you why anger is necessary for a social movement to even exist in the first place, and I'll be explaining to you why the alternative on the government side is not very likely to never actually bring progress and change. Okay, a couple of middle ground to actually establish at first, right? Okay, first of all, what is a social movement for? A social movement wants progress. The government side has told you that in order for a social movement to actually get progress, you need society to participate. Yet, their alternative is what? Peaceful campaigning, setting up posters. Yes, because there are so many problems in the world that somehow society will still focus on you. We believe that that's not actually possible, or that's not something that's probable to actually happen if we look at it from a realistic perspective. We have to understand that there's a lot of issues that exist in the status quo that society is focused on. Poverty, racism, feminism, all of those problems exist. So if you are like an upcoming movement, how are you going to get people's attention if what you're doing is silently campaigning peacefully. We don't believe that that's something, we don't believe that with the lack of disruption, you can get people's attention. Realize that you do need attention in order to garner support. We don't understand how they garner attention in the first place when people, they don't understand how they garner support in the first place if people don't attend to them at all. Okay. Something to rebut, right? Okay, they tell you that at the end of the day, people won't actually support the social movement because of what the social movement is actually doing. We tell you that that's not true because okay, if we look at Black Lives Matter, or maybe we can take an earlier example of when like Martin Luther King and like a bunch of black people started marching, right? We believe that at the end of the day, people weren't like, oh my God, they're marching. They were like, why are they marching? What has happened that was so bad until they had to march? That is what a social movement is fighting for. Not to be sitting down, writing your campaign posters and pasting them on the wall. We don't believe that that's something that will actually help or progress a social movement at the end of the day. Right, okay. Moving on to, before that, is there any POIs? Yeah.
Understand that when we tell you in our characterization that anger meaning radical movements and using like things such as violence, right? Understand that campaign also exists on our side as well. Coming together and campaigning for something also exists on our side.
Yes, but this is a problem that I have with government side. They never actually differentiate to you properly what is the use of anger and what is not the use of anger. We believe that anger, or the use of anger, is expressing your frustration in a way that is bombastic and in a way that actually garners people's attention. If you're just protesting peacefully, people won't actually see that you're upset about anything to begin with. Okay. Moving on to my argument, right? Okay. First argument, a bit of elaboration on what Naila has told you. Okay, Naila talked to you about urgency, right? We believe that the status quo is something that we have to take into account. Regardless of whether the movement happened back in like the 1970s or if it's happening now, the same thing still applies, which is that society is normalizing a lot of bad behavior, right? We believe that racism or catcalling women is something that is heavily normalized in society, so much so to the point that people like victim blame when women like are coming up about their rape cases, etc., right? We believe that if we truly want to get justice for these victims, who are the most important stakeholder, we do need to garner the attention and actually have people understand that the problem is happening in the first place. How? You do that by using anger, by protesting, like Greta Thunberg, right? The issue of climate change was so, the issue of climate change is something that was so important, something that was urgent, that she got onto a mic and then started to criticize the upper class, started to criticize the people in power because they were not taking care of her future. They were not taking care of the younger generation's future. When she did that, people did still support it. Why? Because regardless of how the social movement campaigns, why people will actually still fight or for that cause is because of the problem that was brought up in the first place. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to live in a world where like the trees are dying. We don't want to live in a world where our future kids are going to die. That sense of realization comes when you actually do use anger in the social movement itself. Okay, second argument of today, right? We believe in rallying the minority. Anger is a necessity in order to actually rally the minority to join your movement in the first place. Why? We believe that minorities are people who have been oppressed for centuries. They're people who have been oppressed so much and been told that it was fine because that was normal. So at the end of the day, we believe that with the existence of anger, which is basically you passionately expressing your frustrations and pointing at the person who's oppressing you and telling them that they are wrong. Yeah?
Understand that minorities are already at a lower social class. So understand that once you get backlash from the public, doesn't that mean that majority is less likely to support you in any of this?
Really? One more time.
Understand that minorities are already that social lower class. You agree that they're being discriminated, right? So understand that once you get backlash from public, once your social movement gets backlash from the public, then what
Okay, I got it. Okay, listen, right? Okay, sure. People might not like you, but when people don't like you, discussion happens. Why? Because when you criticize someone and then they start to actually criticize you back, then they actually have a discussion. What is this discussion going to be about? We believe that this discussion will actually be centered around why you're doing what you're doing. So if someone punches me randomly, I'll ask them, why are you punching me? That was kind of mean. And then they'll tell me why you're upset. I'll tell them why I'm upset. And at the end of the day, we have discussion. How do you get discussion on the opposite government side? Where you constantly want to live in a world in which you're telling people, oh,
That wasn't very nice. Can you not do that? No one's going to listen to you, obviously. Okay, we believe that when we rally the minority, that's how a social movement actually progresses, right? Because you can't, without the existence of this anger, without the existence of the unity created from this collective anger, at the end of the day, you have a center in which you can fight for your rights. We believe that that is something that is present. That's what's present in every social movement. Black people are upset because are angry and express their anger about being oppressed for centuries and about slavery. Feminists have been fighting about, been angry about how women have been oppressed for centuries. Every single social movement involves anger because of frustration, because that's the only way for you to actually express that frustration. So, at the end of the day, what have we proven to you? On opposition side, opening opposition, we've given to you why urgency is important and why discussion will actually exist on our side. We've proven to you that the existence of anger and the use of social movements is what got it to where it is today. And with that, I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you, the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now we invite the Member of Government. The floor is yours.
I feel like we can all agree that the problem is status quo, or the problem that we are trying to solve is awareness. How many awareness or how much support we are going to gain from this type of use of anger. But realize that both sides of opening benches doesn't even discuss the process or what kind of incentive did they do or did they have for them to even gain the support and awareness in the first place. So let's go towards the rebuttals. First of all, let me deal with opening opposition. They said about how, when you express anger, you will get urgency and all that. First of all, realize that there's no even elaborate explanation on how you're going to get urgency. Realize that on outside of the house, people also have urgency. Why? Because seeing people in pain, people in torture, people being oppressed by the government are also in social media. That also gives urgency to other people. Realize that people know about this problem. But the question is, does anger actually get us legislative changes and support from other people in the first place? Realize that we can also use sympathy. We can also connect with people's emotion and therefore become more relatable. We can become more civil and actually have meaningful discussion and thoughtful discourses from other people. And realize that they do not even explain why other methods won't even work in the first place. So, secondly, she talked about how it will make people know about your problems. Realize that this is mutually exclusive. Because on both sides of the house, we say that even if you don't use anger, people already know the problems in status quo, right? Realize that in today's society, social movements are more and more popular. People more and more know about the problems in status quo. People more and more know about the problems that social movements put upon, especially in social media, especially because they are getting more attention in the first place. She also talked about Greta Thunberg. Realized that she has a lot of hatred. Why? Because she's just a kid and she does not address the real problem in the first place. So what is the principle? Why is it principally incorrect for you to do this? Because social movements actually advocate for peace. They want to advocate for no discriminations between the people. We know that Black Lives Matter advocates for rights, and feminist movements want to advocate equality. Realize that anger actually creates tension and vandalism and things that actually harms society, and it creates more tensions and actually they resolve problems in the first place. Meaning that when they do this, they are being hypocritical and does not align with their ideology in the first place. And the meaning that you betray the followers' trust who supports you in the first place. And realize that if you use anger, there's a high chance that you will sacrifice lives. Why is sacrificing life bad? Because it actually goes against your value, which is you value life. You value the sanctity of life. Meaning because this is the main focus of social movements. Second argument is about how it will severely decrease the awareness and support. Three reasons why this is true. First of all, it actually discourages the associations with company. Realize that they actually get their media attention from popular companies such as Apple, such as Target, such as Nike. They have reached global level. You know, they have a lot of influence and media control over followers. So why is this true? Why do they actually decrease the support? Because when these companies has association with this type of social media movements, and social movements keep rallying and keep doing violence, it actually harms the company's reputation. It actually decreases the sales of product. This further discourages companies from wanting to associate and give support towards this movement in the first place.
Media only picks up the interesting stories, movements with passion. Would you honestly know about the issues about abortion laws in America if it was not picked up by media, since it's fought with such emotion and aggression?
Okay, realize that you can also get attention from these companies. You can also get attention from doing sympathetic acts. Realize that anger is not the best solution and you do not even explain why. So number two, you actually stray from other social movements from cooperating. Realize that in the status quo, movements actually heavily rely on others. Why? For example, feminist movements actually needs like African American followers. Realize that they are actually pairing with the Black Lives Matter movements because they need a platform to actually inform. They need to work together and cooperate to achieve a common goal. Number three, it actually cuts the government support. Why? Because status quo, government has control over the media and government also has the control over the legislative change. So when you are being violent and you are harming these bodies, their reputation, of course these bodies are going to be discouraged to associate with you and give support to you. What are the impacts of my argument? First of all, the social media movement actually needs support and backing up from others because for you to achieve change, you need to invite other demographics for you to achieve change and get more legislative change. For example, companies actually are favorable by the youth, meaning you attract more youth. So on your side of the house, you actually neglect youth and you push away youth from your movements. Number two, it actually protects yourself against backlash that you receive. Because when you get these companies and these movements to support you, you actually have an ally and a support system to back you up. Number three, social movements actually have their own voice of social media. Social movements are actually not enough because they have a few fan base, meaning that they need to get the support from this. Last argument is about how we brought discourse in the discussions. Realize that media attention is finite and social media movements are put under a microscope. So on your side of the house, you will get more urgent problems are actually discredited because activists who rant are not the ones who are suppressed. These are privileged people who rant because they want to get media attention. They have more popularity and they are people in progressive countries which do not really have a lot of problems. And on the other side of the spectrum, victims who are neglected, victims who are women in totalitarian government are not given the attention that they deserve. Number two is because the resentment of people which they consider won't accept new ideas because they don't care about problems and the hate actually clouds their perspective to accept new ideas and new problems from these social media movements. So what are the impacts of my argument? The problems that the side of opposition actually come to us will not actually be solved and you will have less public awareness. If you want a side where we actually solve the problems inside status quo, where women are oppressed side by side of closing government.
Thank you, the member of parliament. Now we invite the member of opposition to continue the speech. The floor is yours.
Hello. Okay. I'm Grayson. Stay now. I think government side has totally lost it when they started by saying not all social movements are good movements. Because understand that social movements in the first place are pushing for something that is against societal norms. And for example, we can see in today's status quo that forthwith feminism, even if it's radical, we can still see forthwith feminism fighting for something such as the most basic human right, that is abortion, that is legally reversed by the US last year. And we also see that BLM is still a current issue that hasn't been properly resolved, right? So no, we say that the opposition bench were never debating in the 1950s. Opening government are just assuming we would, which just makes them look dumb, and they never answered any question from the opposition on how they will make things better for the social movement, right? Now, first of all, to rebut closing government, right? Closing government says that urgency still happens in government's world when people look at the issues in social media. This is exactly the type of ignorance that government world will look like in today's debate. Understand that this is the type of ignorance because there's three things. Number one is that in current status quo, minorities have limited platform or they are restricted to speak out because they were never catered by the government in the first place, which makes minorities are oppressed in the first place. They were disenfranchised in the whole society, right? And therefore, they were never given the opportunity to speak out. Except for anger, right, which is violence and all, right. And number two, we say that irrational actors in today's status quo, such as the leaders or the big people in charge of the country, can only respond. They have too much power to care about the whole world, right? And we say that they only respond when they're in danger or their responsibility is in danger, and that's why it's likelier for social movements to work under anger, right? And number three, we say that people in government's world can only see what's on the media. And what is on the media? Media only shows you stories that are interesting, right? Because realistically, there is no such, it's not realistic if government side wants to say that, oh, minorities can just go walk up to the companies or media and say, oh, please, I'm in danger, please help me. No, the media won't do that for you if you're not interesting or you're not beneficial enough, right? And the question to ask closing government, right? How long more are we going to wait until more injustices and innocent lives are taken if they truly want to change under your harmony world, right? Because and one more thing that closing government side, the member of government has said, right? They say that government won't support you if you act violently. But let me ask you this question. Isn't the government's job in the first place is to protect the lowest common denominators? Is to protect these minorities in the first place? Not yet, thank you. And this shows completely how ignorant and morally inconsistent government side is. And we still, at least with anger, we still give a chance for government to do their job, which is to protect these minorities. Now on to opening government, right? We say that there has never been a movement that doesn't start with a rebellion, right? Because social movements is already something that we want to push against societal norms, right? And even if they want to give the example of how, if eco-terrorism cuts off our houses pipes, right? They say they wouldn't support eco-terrorism. However, we say that that's not true. Because if anything, if eco-terrorist people cut my pipes, if anything, I just want my pipe back. If anything, people are tired of anger, right? And this is how we prove that in this debate, not yet, irrational actors such as the leaders who have too much power to care about anything will care when there's anger that is threatening them, right? And we say that participation is symmetrical in both worlds in today's debate, right? Even if we lose supporters because people think we're too violent, we say this participation still causes chaos, right? And we say ignorance on government side still brings more harm than the bad perception that we're gonna get in opposition side, right? Because we say that there's never a bad perception in opposition side in the first place. We say that in today's world, nothing can ever be politically correct or incorrect because there exists a lack of objectivity in today's world because what's good or bad is completely subjective because difference of opinions always exists. Right-wing, left-wing people still exist. However, and that's why we say on our side, bad perception is still good perception if it means to be good to these people, to do good for these people, right? Meanwhile, on the government side, they are stuck in a world where they encourage ignorance more. Because number one, they limit the freedom of expression that is anger, and therefore their oppression cannot be expressed better because anger of the same caliber as the oppression will always work. And number two, the negligence of government side will lead to the infringement of the basic human right in today's world for these people to speak up, right? And this is why government's bench case falls, right? Now, onto our, before that. Opening opposition did well, explaining on how anger can bring change, But we are here to tell you why government limiting anger expression is detrimental and they're being morally inconsistent, that's number one. And we'll prove to you, we'll give you the exact answer on how anger gets the traction and support step by step. Now on to my argument, right? We say that decorum can only go so far, and we say that we need immediate drastic action. We need to make noise or ruckus to gain traction. And we say that bad publicity is still publicity because there's no truly political correctness in today's debate. And this violent publicity is still how you're gonna get hurt, it's still how you're gonna spread awareness. So we say that status quo today, that is the use of anger in social movements, must be preserved. Why? Number one, anger that is expressed is literally the freedom of expression and emotion. Sure.
Understand that our characterization, we already framed this debate as social movements that have already been progressive and have been brought to light. So this shuts these social movements into minorities and noise.
Okay, the same social movements that they have been talking about, the same progressive social movements, we still see these movements such as the fourth fifth feminism, still issues such as the basic human right of abortion is still being ignored. And we say that this anger is important, right? Because collateral damage must happen either way, right? Because it's either because even if the social movement is trying to be calm, the majority won't feel easy and calm if you're acting calm anyway. So what's the point? Because understand that anger is symmetrical on both sides, right? If you fight fire and water, it will never work because in Minecraft you get cobblestone. But if you fight fire and fire, smoke alarms will go off. And we say that's better because we say that if you want to fight for something calmly, then eventually the majority are still gonna be tired of you. You're just gonna get the cops and church called on you. For example, if you want to fight for abortion calmly, you're just gonna get the cops and church called on you. However, we say that the majority can still and we say that it's better to make this happen with violence because we say that we will still get the support because of this proximity between the minorities and majority, right? Because the majority have a certain level of understanding of what's happening between the oppressed. They are still have the moral ground to go support for what they think is morally correct. And we say that this is the principle of change making in which there is the butterfly effect and domino effect, because we say that if anger isn't started with one person, nobody will ever start, and social movement will never end up get anything. With that, never be proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, the member of opposition. Next, we invite the government whip to conclude the debate.
Am I audible? Points coming from side of opposition today has been very redundant and very derivative in the first place. What they have been stating from OO to CO has basically been the same thing. Is they have been playing on their best case scenario, which is when suddenly now, when people anger towards the norms of society, suddenly people will actually accept them. And we tell you that it is not very feasible for you, a person who goes against the norms of society, where people already do that on a day-to-day basis. At the end of the day, we tell you harm is much more feasible rather than acceptance on their side, right? In today's speech, I will do a few things. First of all, I will provide you several responses regarding the problematic case coming from side of opposition, whether it be from both benches, because as we have clearly seen, their points have been very derivative. Secondly, I will show you the issues and clashes, and thirdly, I will prove to you what each side contributed to this very messy debate and why we clearly take the win and why we clearly take the ball home today. Let's move on to a few pieces of rebuttals. First of all, it's on the idea of how suddenly, when you voice out and you actually lash out, when you actually destroy public property in the first place in order to get attention, which they side also conceded to the fact that it is bad attention and bad publicity, suddenly people will realize the urgency of the matter and the urgency of your movement. We tell you that perception of society, that's not how it works. More harm will come to you. Even you said it goes against the norm. It means that it will create much more resentment towards them, right? But even if let's take them at their best case, even if this happened, what is the comparative? On government side, sure, we do not get discussions. Sure, there will be no awareness, but on their side, even if they are able to voice out and they get harm, they get backlash, they get resentment from society. Notice how the people who were oppressed, who got no discussion now, are more depressed and are more oppressed by society. They gain much more discrimination than what they are already discriminated. This means that side of opposition is clearly contradicting, is clearly redundant in the first place. Secondly, is also on the argument brought up by, I think it was the deputy leader of opposition. It's about how rallying minorities happen on their side, because now people actually have the passion to actually rally against discrimination. We tell you that it is not mutually exclusive. As my member of government has clearly stated, in today's day and age, social media still exists, and also support from other minorities who have gone through the same thing that these people have gone through will actually garner the support through that. It is not by you shouting at people, it is not by you actively destroying public property to actually garner, as for example, bad publicity, which is stated by themselves at the end of the day, right? So we tell you that even if that happens, our side also gets the rallying of minorities at the end of the day. No, thank you. Third of all, media, this was the BOI coming from the side of closing opposition. I think it was about media attention only focuses on things that are loud, or things that are interesting, or things that are booming in a sense. We tell you why it's not true, because media or news anchors actually caters to things that are relatable to the people, meaning that the next big thing, as for example, if a certain group or a certain minority is much more being oppressed at the end of the day, notice how they have the incentive to actually voice that out. Why? Because they want to make it relatable. They want people who read and to actually enjoy their news outlets to actually become sympathetic and become relatable at the end of the day. So we tell you that not only that these news anchors want to cater towards something that is loud, but also something that is relatable and something that could be the next big thing, which is minorities being oppressed and their voices not being heard, such as stated and conceded by this whole debate at the end of the show.
Realize that a lot of hegemonic media are actually controlled by the government to begin with. The government will always see social movements as something that is inconvenience. So how do you prove to us that they will not be censored?
Okay, even if that happens, right, let's take a look at the comparative on our side. Okay, on our side, these people do not actually bring harm towards the government, they do not actually destroy public property. So sure, we get no discussions. But on your side, when these people destroy public property and bring harm much to the government, notice how, and your side also clearly stated that the government controls the media. So if the government doesn't actually like a certain specific minority or a set of people within the first place, notice how that they are much more likely to actually cater and actually go against the social justice movements. So even if, and we are trying to cater towards your best case scenario, which is governments actually actively controlling the media, notice how on your side, the comparative here is even if, as I stated before, our side gets no discussions, on your side, discrimination happens far much more worse at the end of the day. As I stated before, media attention wants to be relatable and they want to get the next big thing, hence why they will want to cater towards stories such as minorities getting depressed in Africa or women not actually getting the rights that they actually need, right? So notice how not only they want to cater to something that is loud in a sense, but also something that is relatable and can actually make people sympathetic and actually go towards these news anchors in the first place. And even if this doesn't happen, we tell you on your side it still receives hate and resentment. Issues and clashes in this debate. Which side actually creates better discussions? On our side, we tell you better discussions happen. Why? Because we actually become relatable and we actually provide and we actually promote the social justice movements in a sympathetic manner, meaning that these people who actually receive these angers also will not actually reply in a certain way to yeah, sure.
You said on your side that no discussions happen and a minor discussion. Now you think discussion happening. That's contradictory to your own statement.
No, this is on our worst case, meaning that we are trying to play on your best case. On our side, our best case is discussion happens because of social media. But on your side, the burden that you are trying to prove to us is that no discussion is going to happen. So we tell you that, even if it happens, on your side it is much more worse. Notice how it is a comparative, not something that we are trying to prove, right? Like, which side actually creates better discussions? Our side creates far more better discussions at the end of the day. Which is more feasible? Second issue is which is more feasible? People actually hating or accepting these social justice movements if you were to present it, promote it in an angering manner, in a manner that you are destroying public property, right? We tell you, right? We tell you, and also they also consider the fact that you are going against public norms. So we tell you that it actually harms the social justice movements even more. And to play at the best case, we still get support from minorities. Let's take a look at what each side actually contributed in this debate. On opening opposition, they were very redundant about themselves, and their whole case was basically on how, now when you speak up, people suddenly will accept. And I have really destroyed the fact that no, people will not accept. People are much more feasible to actually be harmful and to actually reject the ideology in the first place, right? Because of their characterization about it goes against the norms of society, right, at the end of the day. And they are very assumptions. Secondly, on closing opposition, we tell you that they are very, very derivative from what the open opposition said, and people will actually they will actually get no support from companies to actually socially aware these social justice movements at the end of the day. If you actually want a side that actually cares and caters towards the problem and to actually get rid of the fire and not make the fire better side of closing government. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip. So lastly, we invite the Opposition Whip. The floor is yours.
Government failed to give us an example of movements that were born without any emotion, without any anger. Why? Because they simply can't. Because those movements simply don't exist. First, let me start with a bit of rebuttals to the side of government, where they say media is the biggest key factor in how social media can bring such about big change. But we tell you, your words exactly, you said the media will focus on the next big thing. How is it ever the big thing if no one's ever talking about it, if there's no discussion happening, as you said on your side, if no one's focusing on it, if there's no emotion expressed, if it does not garner the attention of media? How does this happen? Let me give you an example. How is it big if it's happened in Micronesia? Do you even know where that is? And they currently are facing an issue where they're discriminated by countries in the Pacific, and you wouldn't know because they are not you. So how is it relatable to you if it's not you? You said you need to be a key factor of relatability for it to be heard by you. But there's so many things in this world where you are not a part of and it's hard to relate to. Therefore, we say when anger and emotion are brought by these people into the account of this, finally will it be picked up by media and finally you'll know about it. Did you know about this before I told this to you? No, you did not. So moving on with my clashes. My first clash today is on the clash of backlash. So let me tell you what side government has come and told us here. They told us that aggression and harming society and chaos, less people will kind of want to support in this kind of thing and backlash will happen. But we have proved to you yet again how bad publicity is still publicity, and we've given you a thorough explanation with a bunch of case setups. There will always be people backlashing whether it be or not your case is a peaceful case or not. And this is not only exclusive on our side, it's both exclusive on our sides. Both sides. There will also be people let's say you have opposing forces in a peaceful movement, or even not peaceful movement, let's say. You have opposing forces either way. And these opposing forces have the right to be angry at you. These opposing forces have the right to call you out and bring us, sure.
Understand that what's the probability of these forces opposing forces being the majority to actually take action in the first place when these minorities are the ones harming their lives in the first place?
This is where I say it's applicable to both cases. Because already in status quo, when you have a movement that's very radical or either peaceful, there are still people who don't agree with it. Let's say, for example, a movement about veganism. How is this not even a really radical movement, yet people are still opposing it or people are supporting it, right? So it exists on both our sides. And we tell you that if these people have the right to be angry at us for preaching our beliefs, for preaching us outside of the minorities, why don't we have this kind of rights, right? So we as opposition tell you, on talking on our view of this backlash, we tell you rebellion needs to be started, because rebellion is the one that causes change making, and it can surface issues that are not talked about in other communities. We think urgency is expressed and participation will increase only not because of that, because whether it be on our side or the opposing side, it's still participation that people get to talk about our movement, and at least our movement is not forgotten and not washed over and lack of personality unlike your movement. Okay, this brings me to my second clash about participation and support. So side government comes here and tells us, okay, people will not support your movement anymore if you're radical, if you're coming up with these kind of issues, if you're starting chaos, if you're expressing anger anymore. But we tell that on their side, when this happens, when they're peaceful and they're calm, no one will hear about these motions. When no one will hear about these issues in society, this is when we tell you indifference and ignorance happens. Why does this happen? Because people do not concede to the side that these issues might be too small for them and they might never hear of this. And they won't pick a side. They won't pick the side that supports the movement, nor will they pick the side that opposes the movement. And we tell you that this is more harmful. Why? Because we all know that ignorance is simply never the solution to these kind of issues. On our side, whether you oppose our movement or you support our movement, we still get traction in this sense. Our participation still stands. Because participation on any side, whether it be on the left side or the right side, is still participation. It gets people talking. When people start talking, this is when our movement will rise. And this is when our movement won't be forgotten, because we've told you over and over again, ignorance is not the right way. And when you try to deal with this diplomatically, people will not choose sides, people will remain neutral. And neutrality is never the solution in this case. So let me give you another example. Let me elaborate on the point of what I was talking about in the case of the vegan teacher, for example. This fits perfectly in my explanation about participation sport. So people know veganism. If you go to McDonald's and they say, don't buy beef burgers, don't buy beef burgers, we all know that's kind of annoying already, right? But still, you hate against this movement. But don't you still are aware about this movement? You're aware of what these minorities are trying to preach, aren't you? Because not only do you, if you're a hater of the movement or you're a supporter of the movement, if you're a supporter of or a hater of this movement, you still are aware this movement exists. Isn't that true? You cannot deny about that fact. Name me any movements that have been, if you think of any movement that has been preached, you think of it radically. So if I think of an environment movement, what do I think about? I think of supporters and of, I think like watchers of Formula 1 people sitting down on the tarmac during Formula 1 races. That's what I think of. What do I think about protests against the art industry? I think of people throwing paint on the Mona Lisa. That's what I think about. That's what I remember. Because these things are a shining key point in life when you actually remember what these movements stand for. So on our side, what our best case, on their side, what their best case is they have calm movements that will never win. The opposing will yell and condemn you, yet you remain calm. You preach about peace while advocating, let's say, for LGBTQ rights and so on. But while you do that, I'll watch at the sidelines while people arrest you and while religious fanatics discriminate you and while you try to reason with them diplomatically, which will never work. And unlike what government said we've been doing, we are going to actually talk about our worst case over here, like literally. We lose supporters if we can in our worst case, and at least no one will be indifferent or ignorant. We gain traction because smoke is in the air. When you fight fire in the fire, finally there will be smoke in the air. It's either you support or you don't. Democracy will be achieved, Democracy will be achieved when both sides view state their opinions and a right decision can be made too. Through that side, if you're going to stay calm, your opinions won't be heard. Democracy is never going to be achieved because you never have the freedom to express your own emotions as a minority in itself. So we tell you, here our worst case is still better than their best case because both sides will still have support and no one will have a neutral stance. Think about it. Okay, let me tell you now why our case here stands while side OO has not introduced a bunch of things. We have proof to you here not only about how our side will gain more traction and bring more better interest against the media, for example. We have also shown you the principles in this debate. For example, how we value the freedom of expression, how these minorities have all the right to express their aggression and frustration. While government has never given a rebuttal saying how freedom of expression is not a basic right that should be held by these people. Other than freedom of expression, we told you the obligation of government and people to actually help these minorities. And last principle we brought in debate is the change maker principle, where we need one person to stand up for everyone to realize that there's an issue in this movement and the issue should be brought up, therefore, to help the people. This change maker debate not only continues the legacy of this movement, but also brings up the butterfly effect, the domino effect, to make sure this movement never ends until it's truly solved. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations everyone. The announcement of the result of the final round will be at the closing ceremony. Before the judges leave to deliberate, we would like to invite Brother Muhammad Abdul Latif, the Deputy Director of IIUM World